Good to go? All right. Hello. All of a sudden I realize I can't see everybody. Is this still okay? So it is fantastic to be here. I love being at a women's luncheon that serves really good food. And there is a little bit of delight in seeing all the men do all the work. I don't want to be that person, but a little bit, just a little. I was introduced to this church through two of my students, or former students now. They're about to graduate, Alex and Jonathan. It was fantastic having them in class, which is a testimony to the spiritual community that raised them. So my thank you to you guys for being such an amazing community and for the people that you produce. I'm a professor at Azusa Pacific. I teach Old Testament. And if you ever want to nerd out about the judges, let me know. I would be here for it. I am married to my best friend, and I have two daughters. They are a little bit younger. Lydia is 9. She is super into art, tries to be into soccer, and Taekwondo. She's actually fierce. I wouldn't fight her. She's 9, and she could already take me. Kylie was actually supposed to be here today, but she's actually working towards her black belt in Taekwondo. So she had black belt training class today, and she told me she wasn't willing to miss it. Teacher. But Kylie also has started to fall in love with musical theater, which has been really fun for me. I did dance growing up, and our family went to a lot of musical theater. So Kylie's birthday was a few weeks ago, and for her birthday, we got her tickets to see Hamilton. Any Hamilton fans in the room? Everybody else, you're wrong. No, just kidding. It is delightful, and it was great to see it. It's in Costa Mesa right now, in case you are wondering where you can see it. But it was so fantastic. She loves musicals, but she's pretty much only seen them on TV, right? She's, seen the Disney Plus Hamilton, the Wicked movie, like things like that. So watching her, we had the cheap seats. We were like way in the balcony and you couldn't see their expressions, but she was just on fire. She was so happy to be there. And I saw her sitting next to me mouthing the words, I'm not throwing away my shot. I'm not throwing away my shot. I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry. I'm not throwing away my shot. Perfect line for a 14-year-old. She is ready to take on the world. And I loved it. I loved the musical. I loved kind of the creative rendition. I love when you go to see a show, you never see the exact same one twice. The cast, the artistry in it always makes it a little different and a little unique. This time, when I saw Hamilton, I was ruminating on a different set of lyrics. And this one was when Washington says to Hamilton, "Let me tell you what I wish I'd known. When I was young and dreamed of glory, you have no control. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?" It connected to a broader question that I've been asking myself for some years now, actually. And that's whose stories matter. Who do we remember? Who is important enough to remember? And are we seeing the stories as they're unfolding right in front of us? Or do they have to be in the past tense for us to know that they matter? So I think of that a lot when I think about women in the Bible, because often, I remember another story with Kylie. Kylie one day getting the girls ready for bed, and the little one takes more effort. So Kylie, I give instructions, and Lydia, I wrangle. And Kylie asked me in earnest, she's like, "Mom, why is the Bible all about boys and not about girls?" And it hit me hard as a mom, as a biblical scholar, as a woman myself. Do we see ourselves in the stories? What are their fate? Are they forgotten, or were they never written down? So I was thinking about those stories, and I was thinking about the one story, or at least the one text that all women who have spent any amount of time in church are familiar with, and that's Proverbs 31. The Proverbs 31 woman. And I can say that that text has probably been studied and preached on ad nauseum, right? to the effect that so much of it has almost felt like a cudgel to beat us into place. And I'm not saying that that's true for everyone. Some people hear it as a source of encouragement and a celebration of a woman's role in her family and home. And others instead hear it and they hear this laundry list of things that they're supposed to accomplish in order to be this Proverbs woman, and it feels impossible. So instead of encouragement, it brings shame. And I want to propose a third option. This is actually an option that has been embraced by a lot of Jewish interpreters. Proverbs 31, back in the day, was not studied by women to be applied to women, but was memorized by men. And it wasn't about how they demand their women to be, but a song that they sang when they saw recognizable or beautiful traits in their women. They were Eshet Chayel. Their wives, their mothers, their sisters, their daughters. They were women of valor. So let's dig in a little bit. Proverbs 31, 10 through 12 says, a capable wife, an Eshet Chayel, who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her and will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. As the passage begins, we can already feel both hopeful and fearful of what it means to be a woman of God. On one hand, our place in the world is described as more precious than jewels, and someone her husband trusts because she does him good and no harm. Sounds good. But on the other hand, having to do that all the days of her life sounds exhausting. It's a long time, it's a lot of days, and let's be honest, there isn't enough time in the world, it seems, most of the time. But today, as I was reading from the NRSV, a translation I normally like, I'm struck by the fact that a capable wife is not exactly what the Hebrew is getting at. An Eshet Chayel. So in other translations, like the New American Standard, it is an excellent wife. In the Common English Bible, it is the competent wife. In the New Living Translation, a virtuous wife. In the NIV, a wife of noble character, or a worthy woman for the King James Version. I don't think that strikes it either. Eshet can mean wife, but it also means woman. So it can be applied to a wife, but it can be applied just to women in general. It's not our vocation as wives, it's who we are as women. And Chayel is the word valor. It's used typically to describe war heroes. So you have Gideon, who is described as an Ish Chayel, a man of valor. Jephthah, who is described as an Ish of valor, Ish Chayel. Jeroboam and Eliad, you have men all throughout the biblical text who are described in the exact same way. And it's usually because of some incredible strength and prowess, something they do that is worthy and admirable, something that makes them trustworthy. Proverbs 31 isn't about a capable woman, it's about an Eshet Chayel, a woman of valor. So, as Shakespeare would say, what's in a name? What does it mean to be a woman of valor? The structure of the poem models itself as an ancient heroic epic, one that celebrates the acts of a great warrior. But it's brought this military language into the regular and everyday cadence, the nuance of everyday life. She doesn't just make food, she brings prey to dinner. She doesn't just bring home the goods her family would need. It is booty, aka the spoils of war. She spies on the affairs of the house. She girds her loins, which is like Bible talk for like prepares for battle, which if you have children, yes. And her laugh is not just a laugh because she's oblivious, but a laughter in victory. This valorous wife is a heroic figure used by God to do good. Like the kings before her, the judges before that, the patriarchs before that, the heroes of Israel's faith, all of them were described the exact same way. The woman of valor in Proverbs 31 is not meant to be a long to-do list to make you feel guilty, but it's a poem to celebrate the often overlooked life, the everyday life. Our lives often feel ignored for a variety of reasons. For some of us, we struggle to feel like we've earned respect for the sacrifices we've made to stay home. Others struggle to be recognized at work. I'm a woman who teaches biblical studies. 10% of my profession is female. 10%. I am almost always in rooms filled with men. And sometimes it's fantastic. And sometimes I feel like there's this additional caveat. You do a really good job at that for a woman. Sometimes it feels like we're pitted against each other, policing each other's piety instead of recognizing the goodness of God inside of each other. So what kind of woman does Proverbs 31 extol? All of them. The song continues, she seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchants. She brings her food from far away, and she rises while it is still night and provides food for her household and tasks for her servants. She considers a field and buys it. And with the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. A woman of valor, an Eshet Chayil, is an apt businesswoman who works hard and enjoys her labor. She creates products, she works with her hands, she engages with merchants, she manages labor and finance and buys property. She doesn't need permission, she doesn't need help. She is capable and strong. Let me tell you the story of an Eshet Chayil in the New Testament, Lydia. It's who my daughter's named after. And it's Acts 16, verses 14 through 15 and verse 40. Lydia is the first person in all of Europe to convert to Christianity and has been designated a saint since the early patristic fathers. She's best known for her profession. So if you know Lydia's name, you may know Lydia is a seller of purple cloth, which sounds pretty, but reality is that is actually a pretty posh profession in the ancient world. Purple fabric is really difficult to make, and typically only ultra-wealthy and specifically the aristocracy and royalty wear purple. Which means you have Lydia, who, by the way, there is no husband mentioned with Lydia. Lydia owns this incredibly swanky business, and she does it well. The book of Acts tells us that Lydia was a God-fearer even before she met Paul. That she knew the God of Israel, but she wasn't Jewish, obviously, so there were different rules back then, right, for how she could or could not engage. Now, the book of Acts is structured in a really interesting way because it starts with Jesus saying, go preach the gospel to Judah, Israel, and the world. And the first thing you see is the people of Judah and Jerusalem, the Jews are spoken to. And then God sends them out into Samaria. And, fun fact, Samaria is really the lost tribes, the northern tribes of Israel who have kind of intermingled in Samaria. Long, cool story. Taken a fun class on the book of Kings for that one. But they restore the lost tribes of Israel. And then God says, okay, go, and I'll tell you when to stop. And he goes, and Paul goes, and then finally Paul stops. God says, this one. The first convert to Christianity that is not Israel, is not Judah, is Lydia. As a matter of fact, Lydia spoke for her family. All of her household was baptized because of Lydia. On multiple occasions, the Apostle Paul comes back to Lydia, to her house, the church that is established in her home. It has become a hub for the Christian church in Philippi. When he wrote his letter to the Philippians, which for those savvy New Testament readers, is probably Paul's most positive and uplifting letter. He's usually irritated with people, but in Philippians, they seem to be friends. he greets them, and he greets specifically one who has labored for the gospel with him. I like to think that he's speaking, if not specifically of Lydia, at least in part. She used her business, the work of her hands, to honor God. She let her home and her resources become part of a community of Christ as it grew and expanded throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. As we remember Lydia, we can say with certainty, she was an Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor. She girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hand to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. As the Proverbs 31 wife continues, you hear the story of a woman who is strong and diligent. I love this reference to strong arms, right? Ladies, we don't have to be weak. We don't have to perceive ourselves as such. Have you ever seen those ninja warriors? Like, some of them could take us out. Let me tell you the story of Jael, since the book of Judges is my jam. Many people are familiar or may have heard of the prophetess and the judge, Deborah, in the book of Judges. Deborah is the only judge in the book of Judges who's also called a prophet. She's also one of the most successful at uniting the tribes of Israel, but I'm not telling you the story of Deborah. During this time, the Israelites, during the period of the Judges, they were falling away from God and then coming back and then falling away and coming back, and God kept raising up leaders and judges. In Judges chapter 4 and 5, Jabin, who was the king of Hazor, threatened Israel. At that time, God spoke through Deborah and instructed her to tell Barak, who is a commander of Israelites' army, to go and mount an attack against King Hazor, because God will be with them and they will win this battle. Barak said, "Okay, but I'll only go if you go with me." He recognized that Deborah had the presence of God with her, and he didn't want to go into this battle where he might die unless he had his, lucky rabbit's foot. And Deborah said, cleverly, "I will go with you, but the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." Now, for all good storytellers, your anticipation, right? Deborah is essentially saying the battle will go to Deborah, not Barak. And that in an ancient culture would have been really embarrassing for the warrior to lose. Now, they go, they mount the attack, they fight. The armies of Sisera are defeated and dying. Sisera jumps off his chariot, because chariots are hard to hide, right? And he runs off. Because in order to really win the battle, you have to take out the commander. So Barak leaves Deborah behind, things almost over now, and he just chases Sisera, trying to find her. Sisera, in the end, runs and finds a nomadic tribe, tribal people, right? So they live in tents, and they find the tent of Jael. And he says to Jael was a Kenite, which would have been kind of a third cousin twice removed of Israel. He asks Jael to hide him. Now, Jael is alone. Her husband is away at war, probably for Hazor. And she says, "Here, you can hide in my tent." Now, savvy biblical readers will recognize people don't share tents in the ancient world. Men and women, even husbands and wives, don't live in the same tent. This is not a shared space. You don't have dinner inside the tent. You do so out by the fire. A woman's space, a woman's tent, is entered for two reasons. One is her husband's prerogative, and the other is her child's. That is the only reason women come into the tent, or men come into the tent of a woman. So already, any reader in the ancient world would have their eyebrows raised. What is happening? Jael is in a very dangerous space. A warrior, a giant man, just came into her tent, and she is alone. No one can hear her if she cries. Now, Jael doesn't use the husband metaphor, but decides to use the child one. She says, "Oh, you poor man." She gives him some fresh milk. She covers him with a blanket, says, "Here, rest, fall asleep." And he does. And then she takes the one thing that all women who live a nomadic lifestyle would be very accustomed to, and that is a tent peg. And she drives it through his skull. Strong arms indeed. My sister recently sent me a meme, and it says, "When people say I want to be a biblical wife, people think I mean passive and submissive. But what I really mean is that I want to be the type of wife who would willingly drive a spike into the head of a tyrant should the opportunity arise." Jael's name is sung. She is a hero of Israel. I think about the Marvel movies, Black Widow, who uses the expectations of those who think that she's less. Oh, she's just a weak and small woman. And then next thing you know, she's bested them in all the ways possible. Jael, who was strong and brave in terrifying situations and circumstances, her courage will not be forgotten. She is an Eshet Chayil. Proverbs continues. It says, "She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She's not afraid for her household when it snows, for all of the household are clothed in crimson. She makes herself coverings. Her clothing is fine, a fine linen and purple." So the next thing we learn about this Eshet Chayil, this woman of valor, is that she is generous and loving, and she is prepared to act even during dangerous and uncertain times. Let me tell you the story I told Kylie that night when she asked me about women in the Bible. In Exodus chapter 1, the story of Shiphrah and Puah. While Israel was enslaved in Egypt, their population grew to a point that made the Egyptians, particularly Pharaoh, afraid of their presence. Pharaoh cast the Hebrew population in a dangerous light. He says, "Look, the Israelites are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape the land." Now, it's interesting because as modern people, we read this, and I think sometimes we have a tendency to think maybe Pharaoh is speaking honestly. But back then, at this point in time, there would have been maybe 25,000 Hebrew people in Egypt and about 3 million strong in Egypt, like of the Egyptians. Not only that, but the Egyptians at this point in history, not only did they control the Nile River Valley, but all the way up the Levant, reaching into Europe and Asia. Egypt was a world power. And Pharaoh looked at this tiny speck of people that wouldn't bow a knee and said, "They're dangerous. They're far more numerous than we. They're going to kill us. They're going to join with our enemies and fight back. They're going to be a problem." Because nothing motivates people more than telling them that they have to be afraid. How do you convince the Egyptians to throw babies into the Nile? Tell them that those babies will one day kill you. And then it seems justifiable. He increased the labor. As a matter of fact, it's talked about as incredible toil and burden and beat them down. Because in the ancient world, there is this kind of record of a practice where if you make people work hard enough and with little mercy, you can kind of kill them off and get a lot done in the process. You'll minimize the population, minimize the threat, and get a bonus city built. But the Israelites turned out to be just as terrifying as he had once thought. And instead of reducing the numbers, they were fruitful and multiplied again. So Pharaoh decided, okay, plan B. What if I made it look like an act of the gods? So he calls into his royal court these two insignificant and unimportant women, Shiphrah and Puah, Hebrew midwives. Now, the reason this is super odd is because imagine the President of the United States, right, having audience with, I don't even know, somebody who would be even lower than even the lowest on the socioeconomic status ladder in the United States now, right? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that these women would even be allowed in the presence of a demigod, let alone invited there and entering into this conversation, this plot, this plan. Pharaoh says, when you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and you see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, she shall live. Now, the only people who know about this are the midwives and Pharaoh. Why the birth stool? Well, in antiquity, the only people in the room while the baby is born would be the midwife. Maybe mothers or sisters would be there, but they would be attending to the mother while the midwife attends to the baby. Women stood and held a rope back then, right? Gravity helps. The baby just falls right out, I assume. Didn't work that way for me, but I'm assuming. And so the birth stool was literally a stool that the midwife would sit on, and the only person who would know whether that baby was alive when it came out or whether it was dead would be the midwife. So while you hold that tiny baby in your hands and you look, if you see that it is a male, see, on the outside, what this would look like is not murder, because infant mortality rates were really high back then. So the fact that there were stillborns, the fact that babies were born and didn't survive wouldn't have been all that unusual. The fact that it was all male would have seemed like an act of the gods. Your God has abandoned you, Israel. But the text says, Shiphrah and Puah feared God. Subtext, they feared God and not Pharaoh, or at least less than Pharaoh. So instead, they saved the boys. They defied Pharaoh, the demigod that held their life in his hands, because they recognized that some things were more important than safety and security, than an audience with Pharaoh. Make no mistake, they didn't know that God would intervene. So what's really interesting is you often have moments where God speaks and tells people, do this, do that, I got your back. Shiphrah and Puah didn't have that. God stands back in the narrative. And you see people responding to God even before God asks them to do anything. Shiphrah and Puah feared God, and they saved the baby boys. When Pharaoh finally confronted them, they cleverly said, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They give birth vigorously, and the baby gets here before we can see it. You wanted this to be a secret, right? Now, what's really funny about this is, once again, Hebrew is so much fun. I encourage everyone to learn to read it. It is fabulous. But this word vigorous is usually applied to animals. They are vigorous. So Shiphrah and Puah lean into Pharaoh's disregard of the Hebrews. You know how you think they're like animals? Well, they are. So, it's cool. Like, you didn't want this to be outright war, right? And this is the best part. Pharaoh believed them. Apparently never having seen a birth in his life. He believed them because his bias and his prejudice and his hatred blinded him to bare facts and reality. And because God was protecting Shiphrah and Puah. As a matter of fact, it said that God rewarded them their faithfulness. Because they were faithful, he gave them families. We have Aaron, the older brother of Moses, because of Shiphrah and Puah. They are, without a doubt, Eshet Chayil, women of valor. Funny enough, we still don't know which Pharaoh this is. But the world's never forgotten the name of Shiphrah and Puah. Proverbs continues, her husband is known in the city gates, taking his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She supplies the merchants with sashes. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. I'm going to tell you the story of someone who's near and dear to my heart, and probably a person people rarely talk about in Scripture. And it's the daughter of Jephthah. Jephthah was one of the judges in Israel. And Jephthah had a lot of faults. Jephthah was an illegitimate child, and because of that, he was rejected by his brothers and kicked out to the land of Tov. Tov in Hebrew means good, which was ironic because it was a land of mercenaries. And those mercenaries were drawn to the strength of Jephthah. He was super good at war. His brothers, the Gileadites, realize now that the Ammonites are attacking and they're losing, and they ask God to raise up a deliverer, and God says no. Yes, God said no. He said, how about you go ask those gods you've been serving? Whoa. So they said, okay, if God won't raise up a deliverer, we will. And they went to ask their brother, who was super good at killing people. And Jephthah, still a little bitter, says, fine, I'll go back with you, but you need to restore me as the head of household. No longer an illegitimate child, I am now the head of the house of Gilead. And they said, sure, fine, go just win the battle for us. So Jephthah and his daughter, who were in the land of Tov, living with mercenaries, are now raised and returned back to Mitzvah, back to the people of Gilead, in pomp and circumstance and honor. And Jephthah goes and he speaks before the king of Ammon, and he quite pretentious in his speech, actually. And at the end of his speech, he's like, may God judge between Ammon and Israel. And then God's like, fine. And he gives him what he needs to win that battle. And as Jephthah is traveling to battle, he pauses. He has a thought. I'm going to make a vow. I'm going to make a promise. I promise, oh God, that if I win this battle, that I will give you whatever comes out of my house as an olam, a burnt offering, a whole burnt offering. Whoever comes out of the house. Now, for years, interpreters have wondered, why would he do that? He only has one child. But his one child isn't living in a house by herself while her dad's out at war. His daughter is living in the house of his brothers. He thinks he's going to get revenge and call it Yahweh. I'm offering you as an offering because I made that promise to God. Ha ha. It's real hard to get out of a vow you make in the name of God. So Jephthah goes, and Jephthah wins. And when he comes back, the only person on the road to greet him is his daughter. Now, in the ancient world, it should have been a procession of the wives and the leaders of the city who are greeting the incoming warriors. But Jephthah's brothers, we knew from the start, were despicable. And none of them come out to greet him or his victors. The daughter, who was supposed to be too young, is the only one who actually goes out to battle. And now Jephthah has a choice. Do I admit that this vow never should have been, and then maybe question my chance of being restored to the house of Gilead? Or do I continue and offer my only daughter? In that brokenness, in that moment, the daughter had very little recourse. She had no ability to intercede on her own behalf. No one in the community really knew her that well. What could she do? Well, her father was known for his words, And in the end, it is the words of his daughter that actually render him speechless. Do unto me what you have promised, God. Just give me a little bit more time. 2 more months. That's all. 2 months, and she could retreat into the wilderness with her friends, with other women, and come back only to die. And she did just that. Now, the 2 months is significant at the very least because it shows that, in biblical law, if you don't fulfill a vow immediately, you are in violation of the vow. So it demonstrates that it was never about the vow for Jephthah. It was about saving face. The daughter knew she had no recourse, but she ended up creating a space that should have been dangerous, a wilderness that should have been dangerous and scary and frightening, but it became a safe haven to young women. Young women who, it became a custom every year, would go out into the wilderness together to retell the story of the daughter of Jephthah, to find themselves in that story, to find community. As the book of Judges devolves, the role and the place of women becomes more and more precarious. And the daughter of Jephthah was able to create a space for them to be remembered. Jephthah died within 6 years, which is a very bad thing for judges in antiquity. No heir, nothing that he gained meant anything. But the daughter of Jephthah became a legacy, became a festival in Israel. She indeed was an Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor. We don't always get to choose the cards we're dealt, but we do get to decide how we face them. 2 more months may not seem like much, but 2 more months is a lot when you're facing the end of the story. Proverbs 31 ends, "She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her happy, her husband too, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her a share in the fruit of her hands and let her works praise her in the city gates." Let me repeat. Charm is deceitful. Beauty is vain. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Have you ever noticed how very, very rare it is to hear a physical description of people in the Bible? Particularly women. If a woman is described as beautiful, usually it's followed by a situation that her beauty makes things dangerous for her. It's not to describe it or so you see her in your mind's eye or you feel like you should and could praise her. It's to say, things are not going to go well soon. Think about Sarah, who's beautiful, and then Abraham gets to Egypt and he's like, oh yeah, she's my sister. And then he pimps her out. Twice, by the way. Twice. Talk about marriage problems. Beauty can be dangerous in the ancient world, but most of the time, the women who do incredible things, we have no idea what they looked like. We don't know if they were beautiful or if they were ugly, if they were short, if they were tall, if they had beautiful robes or they wore rags. Think about Mary, the mother of Jesus. I have no idea what she looked like, and neither do you, because that's not the part of the story that matters. The reason we all know Mary's name, the reason we all know Mary's story is not because of how great she was at child rearing and how she looked beautiful in that veil, right? She could work it. We know who Mary is because we know how she responded to the most terrifying news anyone could imagine. We think about her being pregnant and never having been with a man, and first of all, that seems terrifying. Childbirth in that context seems even more painful. But on top of that, in her world, she was just dealt a raw deal of a hand. Nobody's going to believe a woman who says she was pregnant and never did anything, right? We just take it for granted. We're like, yes, the virgin birth, cool. Yeah, that's not a thing. That doesn't normally happen. That's why it became part of a story, like one to remember. And in her world, it wouldn't just make her a social outcast. It would make her deplorable. It would make her outside. It would make her rejected. And it would shame Joseph. It would shame everyone in her family. Knowing this, Mary responds, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. From now on, all generations will call me blessed. For the mighty one, the one has done great things for me. Holy is his name." Because to Mary, it was more important that she was part of what God was doing than she was part of what everyone else was doing. Mary was a woman who feared God more than anything else. And because of that, she is an Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor. At the end of the Hamilton play that I saw, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The cast did the final song, right? And that line, "Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?" At that point, Hamilton's dead, his character, right? I don't mean to spoil it. Hamilton died. Should have said spoiler alert. And the only people left on the stage are those who are kind of affected by his life. But they all kind of diminish, right? And in the end, it's just Eliza, his wife. All throughout the play, she says things like, "I want to be part of your narrative. I want to be part of the story." She weaves in and out of the whole thing. Eliza Hamilton lived 50 years longer than her husband. And in those 50 years, she dedicated her life to interviewing all of the men he fought with, all of the people he worked with, everyone who knew him. And I had this realization, everyone backed away, and you just have Eliza, and you find out all of these incredible things she did afterwards. And the play is called Hamilton, and everyone assumes it's about Alexander Hamilton, but really, we are watching Eliza's story. We just didn't know it. We are paying so much attention to the person singing the loudest that we didn't notice that it was Eliza's story the whole time. And afterwards, her story continued. So tell me, whose stories do you continue? Whose stories do you tell? Which women in your life, in your history, in your Bible have faded from memory? Stories forgotten in the background because someone else decided they weren't important. God still does incredible things in our life. God still works in incredible ways through women. In the Jewish tradition, it is men, not women, who memorize this poem. And not to chastise, to hold them accountable to something, but so that every single time they see something that is beautiful or admirable or praiseworthy, they can sing, "You are an Eshet Chayil," a woman of valor, like the ones who came before you. You are part of an incredible story. As we close our session today, I just want to stop talking and give you an opportunity to do this. Think about the stories you know, the Eshet Chayils, the women of valor in your life. We're often taught that, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, that women are our competition, they're our enemy. We're afraid of each other. Afraid of being less than perfect, because if I'm less than perfect, you'll see that I'm not all of this. But this is the thing. None of the women that I talked about today were all of this. They were that one thing in that one moment that mattered. Who are the Eshet Chayels in your life? Do you remember their story? I'll start with one, and then I want you guys to take an opportunity to say and share someone in your own life. Thinking about my mom. My mom, I grew up in a military family. My dad was a lifer in the military, and my mom had an in-home daycare. So we were less than rich. And my mom often helped families who had very little, if any, income. Moms, a lot of single moms who are working really, really hard and barely able to make ends meet. Every Christmas, there was at least one family that couldn't afford Christmas, and my mom would get a list from those parents, and we would buy everything on that list, and she'd say, "This is from you, not me." She would have parents coming and mowing lawns or cleaning furniture if they couldn't afford daycare because they refused to take it for free. And so she respected their dignity, and she found a way for them to work it off. My mom is an Eshet Chayel, a woman of valor. What about you? Open the floor. I could do what I do in school and just call on people, but
My grandmother.
What makes your grandmother an Eshet Chayel?
Had to quit school at 14 because she had to take care of her brothers and sisters and her mother who was dying, and pretty much take on the role of the mother in her family.
Your grandmother is an Eshet Chayel, woman of valor.
I'll say my mother was also. She raised 6 children, and she was everybody's friend. People that drove everybody else crazy, my mom was their friend. She was just a woman of God.
Amazing. Eshet Chayel, woman of valor. Everybody feeling shy?
Mom as well. She's 91. My sweetie. 4 girls and not a lot of money. And Dad had his own business, and there was a struggle, lots of struggles. And I remember one day we were going window shopping. But that was a big thing, and it was fun. It was just simple pleasures. It's my sister Laverne and I. He's 6 years ahead of me in life. And we're going past this little store that had these pillows. I'm a Bugs Bunny fan. Laverne's Tweety. And we go in and we're just looking. We're about to walk out, and Mom had money in her purse. And Mom didn't spend it really on herself. She reached in, and I know where she got it from. It was an envelope where she kept her birthday money, birthday present. And that's what she used. And it wasn't that she bought this material thing, which I had for years and years later until it literally fell apart, but many, many years. And I just look back, and it was just, that's what you do. And the joy she got out of it is the joy that's in us.
Eshet Chayel, woman of valor.
I want to share the story of my grandmother. So she also had many kids. I even lost count. Some of them passed away many years ago. But I remember when she was really old and she was sick, and I would come to her house, there was always someone there with her. And people bringing her fruits and vegetables from little towns from, I'm going to get a little teary. But I remember asking my mom, how come there's always someone here? How does she know so many people?
Yeah.
And she said to me, well, Grandma, she used to own this restaurant, and she always welcomed everyone, even if they didn't have money. She would have a meal for them, and she did that every day. And as she got older and she stopped working, people just kept coming to her, all the people that she helped. And I remember when she passed away in her room, it was filled because of all she helped.
That's beautiful. Asher Chayil, woman of valor.
I'm going to shout out my grandmother as well. My grandfather died really young. I never met him. And so he left my grandmother to raise 5 children on her own. She became a nurse, worked at a psychiatric hospital back when people with mental health concerns stayed in the hospital. And I remember they hated the food there, and she would cook homemade meals, and I would go with her, and she would take some of her patients' home-cooked meals.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Asher Chayil, woman of valor.
My mother wasn't a particularly brave woman, but when I think about it and I look back, she was 40, my dad was 42, and they packed up their home in Scotland and decided they wanted to make a new life and a better life, and came to America with no jobs. But we had, my mother's sister lived here, but my dad was a carpenter by trade. And he couldn't read blueprints, but he did say that he built the entire Queen Mary by himself. So he became a custodian of a cathedral in Pasadena, and they just worked and worked and worked, that my sister and I could have a better life. And when I look back, I think, how brave. I don't know that I could pack up at my age and go to another country.
Amazing. Asher Chayil, woman of valor.
The wife of my nephew, she's in the middle of a family of 12 kids. Her parents were Catholic, so they believed in having as many kids as possible. Her mom probably wasn't emotionally cut out to deal with 12 kids, and she ended up relying on Maria, my niece-in-law, I guess, to help raise the younger ones. And then she had some severe mental problems when Maria was in high school, so Maria had to drop out of high school to help, raise the youngest children. So she graduated a year or 2 late, and then she met my nephew working for some politician in Michigan, but then she went to Michigan State and managed to get her degree, and they eventually got married. But she's just so incredibly talented. She's like the jack of all trades. I mean, she has all these household skills, plus she knows, construction. She excels in all the jobs she does. She's just amazing. And they only have 3 kids, and that's all they're ever going to have. But I just am really in awe and wonder.
That's amazing. Asher Chayil, woman of valor. All right. Anyone else?
My mom, this is a story that kind of lives in family history. And my dad's mother had passed away. I was probably 4, I don't remember. And the family was all, this family's from all Lithuanian. And there was a big family. They all came over one at a time to America. And when she passed away, the family decided that this was a really good time to tear each other apart and to get in a big argument over the graveside. And my mom, according to my aunt, my mom looked over. My dad was just in tears. That was his mother he loved dearly. His sister, my aunt, was also upset. And my mom's just, she's not very tall. And she was 8 months pregnant. And she kind of stood up and started talking to these people and said, listen, you are going to stop yelling at each other. You're going to stop arguing. And you're going to honor this woman that we're here to say goodbye to. And that's all she said. And everybody, my aunt said, we all loved her from that point on. She was the only one that could make that stop.
Wow. That is a moment of bravery. Family brawls at a gravesite, that's... Asher Chayil, woman of valor. Saw your hand up.
I'm going to turn it around a little, but first of all, I'm a guy.
I hadn't noticed.
Our daughter married a youth pastor, our daughter, and because God put it on his heart, our son-in-law, our daughter moved with him to northern Idaho, and they had no idea why. Started a church, I don't know, he had no idea why he's self-employed, does some pastoring on the side, but he also has a woodworking business. But the first couple of years, I don't know how in God's name she did it, but she raised 6 kids and his mom on very little money that he was making, and I've always been amazed at her accounting abilities or how she did it, but she has always just floored me to pieces that she would be able to feed that entire mob on his meager salary, and her heart, she does stuff on the side. She's president of a homeschooling group up there, and so she makes a little money here and here, but the way she raises her kids and teaches her entire family about how to be a godly woman has always floored me, aside from my wife. So.
Amazing. 2 Ashat Chayels, women of valor. So I'll just close with this kind of a blessing. May this church be filled with Ashat Chayels. May we be them, may we raise them, and may we remember the stories of those who came before us. The stories worth telling are not always the ones we remember to tell, so don't forget them.